Hello and welcome to Tanzania Today, a program that aims to project Tanzania's position to the globe, economically, socially, politically, and diplomatically. I am your host, Faida Ngaga. So in the past few weeks, we have been discussing and analyzing President Samia'S Hassan's defining speech to the nation through the parliament on the 27th of June. And we've discussed a lot of topics. Today, we're continuing with the discussion, and we're going to specifically discuss the issue of climate change mitigations and also the energy sector and the progress that Tanzania has made in the energy sector. With me is a groundbreaking members of a panel. To my right is Dr. Richard Mbunda, who is a political analyst from the University of Dar es Salaam. To my left is Issa Omari, who is a political analyst also from the University of Dar es Salaam, and Dr. Bravius Kahioza, who is an economic analyst. A warm welcome to our studios, to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Faida.
So first of all, let's start with the energy sector. Let's start with the progress, the strides that have been made in the energy sector ever since President Samia'S Hassan has entered into power. I'll start with you, Issa.
Thanks for having me, Faida. President Samia'S administration has made several strides in trying to create a transformative energy sector since she came to power back in 2021. And one of the major strategies has been her outstanding leadership in championing clean cooking in Africa. And actually, the government has designed and currently implementing the National Clean Cooking Strategy 2024-2034. And the objective of that strategy is to ensure that at least 80% of Tanzanians use clean cooking energy sources, but also try to reduce reliance on traditional cooking practices such as using firewood and charcoal. As you know, of course, Tanzania has a vast forest reserve accounting for around 48.1 million hectares. However, she has been losing around nearly 470,000 hectares a year because of anthropogenic activities, including deforestation, as well as forest degradation. And therefore, it was very necessary to push that agenda. And this has been part of her clean energy diplomacy, which presently it has positioned her as one of the global champions of clean cooking energy. Which is why in January 2025, between 27th and 28th, Tanzania hosted a summit, Africa Energy Summit, Mission 300, whereby at the conclusion of the summit, you had the adoption of the Dar es Salaam Declaration by the heads of states, of Africa Energy Summit on providing electricity to 300 billion people in Africa. And if you look at the current trend, that World Bank trend, statistics shows that around 700 million people worldwide, they don't have access to electricity, affordable and reliable, as well as sustainable access to electricity. And therefore, that summit also commend, in that declaration, they commend the President Sami'a for hosting the summit, but also for her outstanding leadership in championing clean cooking energy. But also, she has managed to complete the Julius Nyerere hydropower project, where now we have, it has completed and it's operational. You have around 2,100 plus megawatts being produced by the Julius Nyerere hydropower project, but also connecting all regions into national power grid, the national power grid, but also electrifying Tanzania's 12,318 villages. And now they are moving to sub-village level, trying to ensure that by 2050 that all households have electricity, and this is a major initiative. Again, completion of the 400 kilovolt transmission lines from Singida to Arusha, but also from Nyakanazi to Kigoma. You know, Kigoma, this is part of what we call the poverty belt. These are regions for many years, since independence have been at the back foot of development. Kigoma, Kagera, Katavi, and maybe by extension a bit to Rukwa. So you're trying to deliver clean cooking in order to transform as part of transformation of this part of the country. But again, also completion of 132 kilovolt transmission lines from Tabora to Urambo is also a major initiative. So the two 400 kilovolt transmission lines, they want to connect Tanzania national power grid with the regional power grid in terms of regional power integration as part of the East African power pool, and then the African power pool, but also the SADC power pool in trying to, as part of fostering that transformative energy sector across the continent. And I commend the African Development Bank for supporting her clean cooking energy diplomacy initiative. They have done a lot. Actually, the summit, African Energy Summit, Mission 300, that was hosted in Dar es Salaam back in January, it was hosted with collaboration from the World Bank, the African Development Bank, as well as the Rockefeller Foundation, with the government of Tanzania at the heart of that. And therefore, these are the major strides she has been making in that regard. We can also talk about the National Carbon Monitoring Center later, and also I'll come back also to talk more about the National Environmental Master Plan of 2024-2034, in trying to address, to promote national environment and climate change governance, as well as international climate change governance. But one thing that I want to underscore is that Tanzania has achieved in its climate change diplomacy, because now we are currently the chair of African group of negotiators to the United Nations Framework Convention on climate change.
We'll come to that. We'll come to the climate change diplomacy and how President Samia'S has advanced it. Dr. Kahioza, what do you think are the major strides that have been made in the energy sector in Tanzania?
I think she has been, I think the country has been spot on in terms of energy economics, if I would like to take that line. As he has alluded a while ago. But I would like to point out some few areas that I think are very important. One, let's start with the point of how deforestation, for example, has been eating up our economy. He has given the data. When she came into power, when President Samia came into power, Tanzania had lost about 1.6 million hectares because of deforestation, and data showing that was almost accumulating to the way in which deforestation is eating up our economy to the tune of about 3.3 billion US dollars. That's a huge amount of money. And one of the reasons as to why that is happening is because we don't have, the population has got no alternative source of energy, therefore they resort to firewood and charcoal. And to mitigate that, I think the nation, under her leadership, has been able to intervene in terms of providing alternatives, and one is clean energy solutions. And she has been, I think the president has been able to put in place the strategy for clean energy in Tanzania that will be up to 2034. And it is estimated that almost 80% of Tanzanians by that time will be able to use, to use clean energy in their houses. That's what the plan is estimating. But of course, that is very important when you are looking at the poverty metrics. Given the statistics, people have been arguing that our economy has been growing, but people have not been feeling that. Now, few people understand that one of the reasons is that energy consumption has been at its knees. And by providing these solutions in terms of clean energy, clean cooking energy, what will that portend is that if the pace of implementing the strategy goes as we are planning, we'll be likely to increase 180 US dollars in terms of per capita income a year by 2030. What does that mean? If you have a nation of 1,200 US dollars as per capita, you'll have 108 more, and that will be pushing you to the goal that we are aspiring to achieve, the upper middle income country. So I think we have shown that we have those intentions, and we are doing what it takes to get there. Two is, of course, the question of electricity as an engine of growth and as an engine of production. And he has talked about the Mwalimu Nyerere Dam. Now, one thing that has been very clear is that policy reversal has been a problem in our economic management. And what we have been able to do, I think, in the last 4 years, we have shown that we can change that trajectory. And by implementing these mega projects, so for example, for the energy sector, we are sending a signal that Tanzania can get rid of policy reversals when she's implementing her policy. Lastly, I think it's about a new climate economy. You see, economies today around the globe are mainstreaming the climate economic question at the center. And that's why in every policy document today, you can not afford to miss that link between the economy, the society, and everything. I think from society to the economy and everything in between without putting that aspect in it. And Tanzania is mentioned that we are doing greatly. I remember I read President Ruto's article in the Project Syndicate a year ago, and he was very categorical in terms of what Tanzania is doing. Of course, the questions about financing, the financing aspect of climate change. And President Ruto wrote in the Project Syndicate that President Samia is showing the direction in terms of doing that. And I think more than ever before, Tanzania is mainstreaming that aspect of new climate economy, the new climate economy in the grand policies of our nation. So I would like to start with those few areas. But a footnote before Dr. Richard intervenes is that, you cannot transition this economy if you don't look at what we now economists call womenomics. And there is no better aspect of looking at energy economics without looking at women. And because of her instigation in that area, because of the president's instigation of what I have called Samia'S in this sense, is that she's opening up that space of womenomics in our management and economic governance. In the last 4 years, because of that, more than 563,000 women in Tanzania have had access of clean energy infrastructure in their homes, from the northern part of Tanzania to southern part of it, from the western parts of the nation to the center of this country. And that is massive in terms of mainstreaming womenomics in our governance of the economy. And this is very important to take away when discussing what Tanzania has done in the last 4 years.
Dr. Mbunda. They have preempted, but just briefly, what do you think of the strides in this sector?
Yeah, very briefly, basically. The other time when we met discussing issues on this show, I talked about the former president, John Pombe Joseph Magufuli, who was, of course, minister, for works and infrastructure. And I said, he spent nearly 2 decades in that docket. And basically, there were things that he desired, should have been completed if he had all the powers. So I would say the same about President Samia Suluhu Hassan, because she was vice president, and she was basically the minister for the environmental docket in this country. And there were so many issues that she probably desired, she would have implemented if she had the powers. So it is no surprise now that she's president. One of the chapters of her very beautiful book, that she will leave behind to Tanzanians is how what she has done to the environment and the energy sector, basically. And you note that, first of all, she basically has been very consistent in attending the COP meetings, COP 2026, Conference of Parties, meeting 26, which was held in Glasgow. COP 27 was held in Dubai. No, in Egypt. It was in Egypt. And of course, COP 28, which was held in Dubai. It's only COP 29, which the vice president attended. But in those meetings, she's made quite a considerable impact in terms of what the world, Africa, and Tanzania should do to the energy and environmental sector. So, yeah.
Yes. Let's continue on that. You just jumped into climate change diplomacy.
Yeah.
So let's continue to build on Dr. Mbunda. What role has President Samia played in advancing climate change diplomacy? You had started, so yeah, let's continue.
She has been playing an outstanding role in that regard. And luckily, in late last year, she was invited, because of that, she was invited to attend G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And one of her main agenda was clean cooking and clean energy diplomacy, as well as climate diplomacy. And in trying to push developed countries, because G20 is a group of both developing and developed countries, rapidly developing and developed countries, so trying to push that so that they can transfer more climate funds as part of the climate financing to try to help these countries that are devastated by climate change. They don't have that extensive carbon footprint, but they bear the brunt of climate change catastrophe crisis, and therefore she has been pushing that in that regard. And Tanzania has been playing a leading role in trying to push that agenda, even in the African region. For instance, Dr. Richard Muyungi, who is the presidential envoy and advisor to the President of the United Republic of Tanzania on environment and climate change governance, is the current chair of the African group of negotiators of the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC of 1982. And actually, last month he was in Germany for 2 weeks, trying to work out preparation for the COP30, which will be held later on this year in Belém, Brazil. And part of the agenda has been that to push that agenda for climate financing. One of the challenges currently, and that Tanzania and many other developing countries, including the African group that they have been grappling with, is most of the financing they have been coming in form of loans. Not a development aid or grants, not official development assistance. You can look at Mwendo Kasi, Dar es Salaam Rapid Transit. You can look at DMDP, Dar es Salaam Metropolitan Development Project. You can look at Msimbazi Basin Development Project. These are all climate mitigation and resilience projects that help the country to adapt to climate change. But most of them, they are loans from either International Development Association of the World Bank, which provide concessional loans to low-income countries. And therefore, a new agenda as part of a unified and a common voice of Africa in the international climate change negotiations that we need to at least move from loans to development aid, especially for these countries, so that we can try to help these countries emerge from the catastrophe of climate change. And again, Tanzania wants to leverage on this market-based solution to carbon emission, the so-called carbon trading, forest carbon trading, carbon credits, and carbon offset. And actually, 2026, as part of RED Plus policy, the reduction of emission from deforestation and forest degradation, which has led to the creation of the establishment of the National Carbon Monitoring Center at SOAS, who is the hosting institution for this one. But trying to leverage on that carbon trading and trying to build domestic capacity, but also expertise and technology in order to leverage on that, because international carbon trading system has been there since 1997 after the signing of the Kyoto Protocol to the UNFCCC. But Tanzania did not benefit from that because it lacked expertise and technology. But again, the Paris Climate Change Agreement of 2015 recognized the role of forest conservation in reducing the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, primarily carbon. And therefore, with that then came the RED Plus policy, which Tanzania also tries to integrate it as in her national energy compact. We have an energy compact, and Tanzania actually was one of the 12 countries that presented their national energy compact at the African Summit in January. And this national energy compact wants to energize the future of Tanzania, but also ensure affordable, accessible, reliable, and sustainable energy consumption among her population, and the critical sector in trying to transform these economies, particularly as they want to industrialize. Of course, they have to go through that in the process of industrialization. But then I just say that they will emit more, but they have to go industrialize because there is this notion that is coming up that developing countries can skip industrialization and focus on service industry, which will help them transform from low income to upper income economies. But I think that assumption is fundamentally misguided. Industrialization is key, but as I said last time, that it should be the agrarian revolution that should lead industrial revolution, not the other way, not industrial should lead the agrarian revolution, because these are different. The first industrial revolution and the current revolution that we are trying to undertake in terms of industrialization of our country, these are different contexts that they don't lead. Then I'll come back more to talk about Tanzania's climate change diplomacy. Thank you.
Dr. Bravius.
I think in terms of climate economy diplomacy, I think she has been outstanding. One is her voice, as he has alluded. When Prime Minister Modi was the president of the G20, had an opportunity to invite the president of Tanzania in one of the special meetings. I think it was held before the completion of India's presidency with the G20. And President Samia'S speech was important in three aspects. One, she highlighted how Africa has to join hands in terms of combating the climate change issues. Number two, she was big in terms of climate financing, and her argument was crystal clear. She argued that yes, Africa needs resources from the rest of the world in terms of the big polluters. But of course, she argued that there should be internal mechanisms in the economies, to make sure that they have these mitigations which are domestically driven in terms of policymaking. And then the third question that she highlighted was about agriculture in terms of climate change. And I remember in one of the food prizes that was hosted by, I think, President Adesina in the United States, where the president attended as one of the other guests of honor, her argument also that climate economy is central to agricultural productivity, and then she was trying to factor that in terms of what Tanzania is doing in the agriculture space. And it was praised, of course. And I remember reading one of the articles in the Financial Times thereafter, and Corey, who is one of the international business analysts, argued that the voice that is coming from Dar, because of what President Samia had presented, was not only important for the African countries, but was promising in terms of leadership in that space. And that is very critical when it comes to voicing up, because if you don't do that, and that has been our problem, then it is assumed that everything is hairy-mary. But in fact, I think the climate question is eating up African economies. So I wanted to say that the voice she has given out there is important. Of course, in economic diplomacy, there's no other place to start but from your arguments, and her arguments have been very bad. Two, is that I think she has positioned herself in terms of arguing about Pan-African solutions to these aspects. And I've listened to a number of her speeches. I think 4 of them she got into power where she has talked about climate change. And her point is that there should be a position in which African countries are collaborating enough to make sure that we don't only subscribe to the foreign-driven solutions, but mechanisms in the economic blocks of Africa and at the continental level in the way we have to deal with that. But that Pan-Africanist way of doing things is commendable, I think, from what she has done. But let's give it to her. The last point I want to make is that, as I said last time, that countries, from Machiavelli, that countries will have to have a renewal after every moment. And if they don't, they rot from within. And one of the aspects in terms of the renewal is her push towards the changes we have made in terms of the foreign policy. If you read the new, the injections in this new foreign policy or the revised version of 2024, climate has come at the center. And reading that document, you see a nation that is that's not only ready to mainstream climate change or the new climate economy in terms of its foreign policy, but you see the nation that has plans on how to collaborate with the rest of the world, but also having clear solutions in terms of how we invest in our infrastructure, in our agriculture, and the rest. But how do we tap the potentials that are necessary from international partners, but also equipping our technocrats in that space to make sure that we do not only align our ambitions, our aspirations to the globe, but also what we think that we need to be doing from the internal perspective. And I think these are the areas where she has been able to push that argument, and not only by words, but by deeds as well. By
action. You've spoken about the wealthier countries with the pledges that they have been making financially to support climate change mitigations to developing countries. But one of the challenges that has been very prominent is that they're not fulfilled. There's the issue of fulfillment of the pledges to developing countries. And even President Samia Suluhu Hassan has spoken about that in one of the COP conferences. My question is, what do you think can be done, maybe diplomatically, in order to ensure that there is fulfillment of the pledges, the financial pledges by developed countries? And I'm going to throw this question to Dr. Mbunda.
Yes, before I respond to that, I just wanted to clarify a little bit, particularly, especially to our viewers, so that they can see the linkage between energy and climate change. Because the moment you don't use clean energy, the moment you rely on fossil fuels like gas, coal, and oil, that's where you pollute the environment. And you note that countries that are developing, like in Asia now, it's the leading polluting continent, with I think 53% of the total emission of carbon dioxide gas to the atmosphere, okay? While China is also leading as a country with 27%, okay? So basically, when we talk about climate change, we must focus, and that's why, these debates actually came from the COP, meetings, the Conference of Parties meetings that were held either in Glasgow, Egypt, Baku recently. That's where they discussed these things. Now, with regard to the commitment, I think it was in 2021 when President Samia made her maiden speech to the United Nations, when she started, mentioning that. And it is because of, she has been in the, Ministry of environment and the union for more than 6 years as vice president. That's why she had this, this push inside her, to tell the world, particularly developed countries, to live by their commitment. And these commitments were basically made in 2015, the Paris Agreement, where developed countries agreed that they would commit like 100 billion United States dollars annually to support issues of climate change in developing countries. But of course, commitment was, in terms of implementation, the implementation was slower, And I think if you compare, and of course it was up to 2020 because it was a 5 years scheme, but then they extended it up to 2025, this year. And if you read reports, it is indicated that it's only in 2022 where actually the commitment surpassed the $100 billion dollars mark, you see, only 2022. But in all these other years, at least there's an increasing trend from maybe 2022 up to 2024. But commitment in terms of the climate financing made by developed countries were not up to the agreement that were reached. And actually she pushed these countries to abide by the commitment. And maybe one other thing that I would like to add, particularly with her involvement in this COP agreement, is I think it was in Dubai, the Dubai COP, 2003, where she championed for the loss and damage fund, loss and damage fund particularly, which is happening to, developing countries that are faced with, extreme conditions as a result of climate change, such as, heavy rainfall. Here in Tanzania, we had this experience, Hanang, due to heavy rainfall. There was, mudslide, you remember, and so many villagers were affected there. And therefore, the idea was to create a fund, an international fund that can help countries that are affected, by such crisis, such as, floods and so on and so forth. And in the COP conference that was held in Baku, Azerbaijan, last year, that's where actually the fund was finally created. And I'm told up to the moment, there are pledges of something close to 720 million USD that could be used, to handle, crises that are associated with, climate change. So, some of the issues that Tanzania has pushed, and at the forefront of it is President Samia'S who actually has been, harboring these ideas, and she's taking them to the world. Yeah.
My question was also, what can developing countries such as Tanzania do to make sure that wealthier countries stick with the pledges that they have made?
Well, we have to recognize the fact that the climate change phenomena is polarizing the world, particularly with the rise of neoconservatives in the West, led by climate skeptics like the US President Trump, who sees it as a hoax and a China-made up hoax that wants to undermine US influence, geostrategic and geopolitical influence. And so climate change now is part of a national security concern if you consider we factor in human security as an environmental security. But again, these neoconservative regimes that are on the rise in the West, they are actually they are climate skeptics. and they are trying to reject, to try to give out funds, to abide by the commitment that and the pledges that they made since 2015. And this is a major challenge to climate financing. We'll be creating funds after funds, but without abiding by these commitment pledges, that will be problematic. We already have the Global Climate Fund, GCF. We have Carbon Fund, and we have now Loss and Damage Fund. And actually, Tanzania has been now mobilizing the African group and the developing countries as we look forward to the G20 summit in South Africa, that we should continue with the dialogue and negotiation as well. COP30 in Brazil, Belém, Brazil, as well as the G20 summit in South Africa. Dialogue. Dialogue is the only solution because it's part of negotiation process, continuous negotiation. Otherwise, with the unprecedented increase of geopolitical conflicts, it means countries are diverting their funds from development aid to invest more in defense, particularly the major donors, the Nordic countries, the countries like Sweden. The Nordic countries were major contributors to Global Climate Fund. Actually, the National Carbon Monitoring Center and the RED policy was pretty much financed by the Kingdom of Norway. But now, because of the existential threat and national security that comes from the conflict nearby Ukraine, they're trying to invest more now in defense and to reduce their development finance. And this is challenging and problematic, which is why I said one of the problems has been that most of the financing has been coming to this country in form of loans, which pushing this country on the brink of indebtedness, given that there is mounting public debt. The public debt is on the rise in Africa and threatening economic stability and socio-economic progress. And therefore, dialogue is one solution. And we have been pushing that now and then in different forums, including as we go for Belém this year, COP30, as well as for G20 summit in South Africa, and even the G7 summit also later on this year, in trying to make sure that we get the necessary funds in order to finance climate mitigation, adaptation, resilience projects, so that we can at least survive for some time, because climate change is threatening our very survival, particularly when it comes to environmental security and even community security, particularly for rural livelihoods and communities that rely much on agriculture and livestock keeping.
I think I would like to bring this to the following issues. Number one is, there is a recent report that is named Just Transition. It has been written by famous African economists, led by a Tunisian economist called Professor Harboub. And that report is, I think, informative in terms of what Africa should be doing. They are looking at it from the energy deficit trajectory. What they are saying, which I agree with, is that energy deficit is the main problem to them and not climate change. Because what they are saying is, if these African countries will be able, for example, to have sufficient energy and then reducing energy deficit, what will that help is that they will have a lot in terms of economic expansion that will give them a lot of resources, financial resources, which are not dependent to financing from the rest of the globe, particularly the big powers. And so I think one of the areas that we have to look at is, how do we bridge that gap? Number two is, how do we navigate the question? Because there's a contradiction. On one hand, you want to grow. I know what growth demands is that necessarily you will have to be a polluter. So as much as you say these big countries are the main source of climate change, necessarily you have to be that polluter to develop. I think the contradiction has been, when you hear Trump calling it a hoax, his point is simple, is that how do you stop us doing what we are doing for growth for the African countries or the developing countries to benefit, quote unquote, from us not polluting? And that is central again to African countries. Because if you look at the natural resources that are which are bringing these ping-pong games in terms of polluting the environment, are very essential for our growth. Look at, for example, coal. That is, countries are saying that we shouldn't be extracting. And these countries haven't, so for example, Germany has not stopped using coal in their industries, and we have a lot of coal here in these countries. In Tanzania, we have gas, which is known as sweet gas in the world, and now we have this a lot of noises about gas extraction. So I think the fundamental question is, if we want to grow so that we can develop, there is no shortcut, in my view. It is that we will have to make these resources beneficial. And one step is exploiting them. And I think President Samia is doing a very great job in terms of that, because she's saying we need to extract these resources for our betterment today. And that will help us. We will not be waiting for the rest of the world, to bring us fund to do what they call damage control. In fact, our problem in terms of climate change is not that. What does damage control do? Because what you do actually is sending peanuts to these countries. And we're saying no. And I think the president is doing well. In terms of statistics, I think one climate change expert has blatantly said that you look, the money that you say we are giving you as a damage control mechanism is not even enough to establish institutions for climate change in Africa. In fact, there is a huge gap in terms of what we expect to get and what really we have to be doing. Now, let me tell you one thing. In the developing countries, climate change costs $1.2 trillion a year. And these people are saying, we give you 20 billion a year to control climate change. Surely, you cannot be depending on $20 billion while you are losing $1.2 trillion. So I think our central problem is, how do we solve this contradiction of growth, which should come from our natural resources, while the international rules, quote unquote, are saying, oh, you have to be slow in these aspects. I think we have to speed up in terms of extracting, while of course, I'm not saying when you do that, a balance. It's not that we should be polluting anyhow. Anyway, we should be cautious. Lastly, it is important, again, to establish or to have these financial institutions, as we said last week, of our own in terms of climate change control. Because if you look at every aspect, whenever Africa or these developing countries have been dependent on these institutions in a particular aspect, we always not get what we want. Now, what happens is that these institutions allows you to do one thing, that take what you get until you get what you want. Now, the question is, when will I get what I want if I keep on depending on the institution that I do not control anyway? So I think Africa is able to have these institutions. Why they're arguing for changing of the financial architecture from the global, at the global stage, they have to have their own institutions from the country level, the regional level, and at the continental level, if possible. These are the things I see that African countries, or the least developing countries, and I think also President Lula of Brazil has been very categorical in that aspect, that we can marshal these resources from these countries and do what we can do. Lastly, I want to reiterate the thinking. So they say, we will give you funds, we'll give you money to control the thing. But you see, these countries which are saying that thing, at a certain point, they were relieved of their great responsibilities. African countries have mountains of debts coming from those countries, and these countries have refused to relieve these countries from these debts. But you can ask people, what happened, for example, in 1953 to the European economies? For example, Germany was allowed to go free of over 100% of their debts that was coming from the United States of America, and helped Germany to be where it is. So today, African countries should be also telling them there is a correlation between climate change and public debts and private debts in Africa. So what is critical, what is important is that let these big shocks, let them allow relieve African countries of their mounting debts to start with, and then allow them to have the fiscal space to build their infrastructures in terms of of financing, so that they can be able to combat the impact that themselves are not causing.
Well, if I can chip in a little bit, particularly he brought in an interesting
briefly, Doctor,
policy debate on energy and its relationship with issues of climate change. Basically, we have energy security, we have energy sovereignty, and we have energy sustainability. So three basic concepts, okay? So, and of course, there are scholars such as, Thaler and Hoffman. They are writing about the impossible energy trinity, okay? That you cannot achieve all the three at the same time. And of course, they are saying, for example, the options that are available, and of course, let me very briefly clarify. Like when we are talking about energy security, we are talking about energy accessibility, energy availability, okay? To ensure that energy is available. No power cuts, but also energy affordability, okay? And when you talk about energy, sustainability, you are talking about, concentrating with renewable energy, such as water, wind, solar energy, okay? And cutting down non-renewable energy, fossil fuels, okay? That's where you get energy sustainability. And when you are talking about energy sovereignty, there is the hard part of it, having control of infrastructures of energy, you see, such as we have to ensure we have, power plants, that generate energy in a country to ensure that there is, sustainability, in terms of, the energy that can be powered to the country, okay? But also there is the software of it, which is making sure that policies, and rules and so on and so forth are controlled by us as a country. And finally, independence. Independence in such a way that you don't need, someone, because power, energy is considered as a security, a national security issue. You don't want, if you are depending, on energy from a neighboring country, if you have entered into a dispute, they might cut the power, and then you'll be in the dark, you see. So this issue. So these scholars are saying it is very difficult to achieve, the trinity. That's why they're calling it impossible energy trinity. So, but the options there, one of them, they call it a dirty option. Dirty option is to ensure that you have energy security, and energy sovereignty, regardless of the sustainability. And that's what basically countries such as US and you are saying that they're calling it a climate change hoax. That's what they believe in, the dirty option, okay? You go with what can sustain you, okay? You go with what you can control. So you avoid issues of, sustainability, because it is very much linked to the environment, okay? Now, the different option that probably Tanzania is taking if you analyze it critically, is that we are probably going with energy sustainability, or we are trying to integrate the two, okay? Energy sustainability, and again, trying at least to have a little bit of energy security and energy sovereignty. So, I mean, in the context of our policy, we are trying a lot. And this actually is giving the country the moral authority even to, point fingers to countries that are, big polluters, but they don't want to commit to issues, to the commitment that we have made to, in the international, in the multilateral agreements that we have entered. So I would say, and particularly with regard to the U.S. and what their commitment are, U.S., China, I think there was a mistake, like in the Kyoto Protocol, you remember? I remember that one. George Bush actually said, technology will find the solutions, okay? Because the U.S. actually withdrew from the Kyoto Protocol, and they did not be a part of it. But there was a mistake, I believe, because commitments were put only on the part of developed countries, and developing countries that have become big polluters. And I gave an example of Asia and China, who were actually relieved from the commitment. But I think the Paris Agreement is trying to balance, the commitments of both, okay? So I think that in itself is, a big push, a big diplomatic push to ensure that everybody should have certain commitments and they should abide by it, okay? And then maybe to use other diplomatic ways of trying to to push or to convince, these developed countries, to do more in terms of these commitments.
Let's wind up with the last question that I'm going to throw to our economic analyst here. So Dr. Mbunda earlier explained the relationship between climate change and energy. So I want you to explain to us the relationship between climate change and the economy of a country, because some people may not know how they affect each other, but indeed they do have an effect on each other.
I think they are both correlated, and also there is a causality. So I think it's very important to look at the causality relationship and the correlation of it. One is that when climate change bites much in the economy, one thing we are sure of is that you will not remove people out of poverty, because what will happen essentially is that these people are deprived of their alternatives, for example, to energy. And what they will resort to is the environment. And remember, it is the environment that helps these people to do their daily production. For example, in countries like Tanzania, where agriculture is predominantly an economic activity. So you are sure that you cannot deal with poverty alleviation or poverty elimination if you have that fact. Number two is that climate change affects growth. And here in Tanzania, for example, the impact of climate change is that it is eating up to 0.5% of our growth. And if this trend continues to 2050, climate change will be eating up to 2% of our growth. That is a huge detriment to economic growth. Number three is that you cannot build a sustainable economy, because everything that you want to do is that it's not about growth, but sustainable growth. And sustainable growth means that one, you reduce the gap, the inequality problem. When you have that climate change, as I've said, welcome to the rural economies, that you'll be creating a huge gap. There won't be equality, so you have a lot of inequalities, and that will affect sustainability. But the most important sustainability is that the future will always be fragile, because you do today what will affect your future progress. And therefore, you have to make sure that you do that. So these are some of the areas where I think there is a correlation.
Very briefly,
climate change, the climate change catastrophe or crisis presents both opportunities and challenges. It is also an opportunity in another way for countries with vast forest reserve like Tanzania and Brazil, Western the Amazon is considered the lungs of the world because it contributes to 20% of the global oxygen concentration. And in terms of the challenges, you can look at Tuvalu, the country is almost the island. The tiny Pacific, micro-Pacific island is nearly disappearing, and actually Australia have issued visa to try to transfer the nationals of Tuvalu to Australia so that they do that. But in terms of opportunities, we can look at forest carbon trading system. Carbon credits and carbon offsets. I don't want to delve into detail because it will take time about how the two companies work.
It is controversial.
And controversial, of course. It's controversial given the trading system. And actually, countries like the US, they don't have a carbon trading system because of that, what we have been discussing about this policy debate and policy. There's no consensus in that regard. So it's an opportunity for these countries to leverage on that as part of forest conservation. So. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you. So one take that we're going to leave with today is that to make sure that climate change also becomes an opportunity for developing countries. And that marks the end of our program, Tanzania Today. So today we were discussing President Samia'S Hassan's defining speech to the nation through the parliament on the 27th of June. She spoke about a lot, virtually all sectors. But today specifically we discussed climate change mitigation and the energy sector. I am your host, Faitha Ngaga. Stay tuned to other programs on TBC1.